Hello and welcome to the Rogers Brief. I'm Adam Rogers. Thank you for watching and thank you for listening. I'm back in my familiar surroundings here. I was in Halifax yesterday, and actually today I watched day 15 of the Mass Casualty Commission proceedings in person, and actually they were held not at the Nova Centre where they've been to date, but today instead it was at the Prince George Hotel next door to the Nova Centre, and in a smaller conference room. It was kind of interesting in this way that it's probably a tenth of the size of the Nova Center space that's being used, and it didn't seem like we were overly cramped in that space. So anyway, a point of interest perhaps on resource usage by the Commission. I was in Halifax yesterday. If you've been following the videos, you'd know, for Paul Palango's book launch. His book, 22 Murders, was released just a couple of weeks ago. I've read a copy. I ordered mine as an ebook and really enjoyed it. I talked about that in the video yesterday. So stayed up in Halifax last night and watched the proceedings this morning. Now, day 15 of the proceedings was dealing with police paraphernalia, so equipment, clothing, the decommissioned vehicles that the killer used and had purchased. And then there was also there's some presentations on those and how the evidence unfolded, and as far as what they've discovered about his internet searches and his purchases of those items. And then there's also a witness, Max Liberatore, who works at the GC Surplus, which is the Government of Canada surplus operation, which sells the decommissioned vehicles, among other things, seized items that are seized by the police and sold as government surplus. So he works there, dealt with Wortman numerous times in that role, and so he gave some testimony as well. So I'll talk about all of that in a moment. Just thinking about other news stories. Now, people watching these videos will have by now become fairly familiar with inquiry laws. There was another story that came out today, just for your interest, of federal inquiry that's just been called. And you'll recall when the Ottawa protests, occupation, whatever you want to call it, was taking place, that the federal government invoked the Emergencies Act, and then the protests occupation was over. Well, as part of the Emergency Act, the government is required within 60 days to call an inquiry, and the Prime Minister did so today, appointed a Court of Appeal judge from Ontario as the commissioner. So just by way of comparison to the Mass Casualty Commission, this will be a proper judicial inquiry, more so like the Desmond inquiry than like the Mass Casualty Commission, which has just sort of non-judicial commissioners appointed. So it'll be interesting to watch that unfold. I'll keep an eye on that, and if there's anything else of interest that comes along with it, I'll bring that to your attention. But just for people that may have an interest in inquiries generally, that was something that came up in the news today. It brought to mind something I noticed today. Well, I've noticed other times, but I'm not sure if I mentioned, but when I'm always looking for distinctions between the Mass Casualty Commission proceedings and regular, so-called regular inquiry proceedings, or even court-like proceedings. And there's two that stood out today. One is when the commissioners come in and out of the room, nobody stands up. There's no all rise, and there's no all rise when they come in or when the proceedings are adjourned. So that's a little off-putting as a lawyer. Sometimes you're almost conditioned to get ready to stand when the proceedings are ready to start. The other is when the witness was called, Mr. Liberatore, he was called to the witness table. Now, it's a very minor distinction. It's just a word, but it's not called to the stand. And sometimes I wonder if the witnesses that are called to a witness table maybe have a different sense of the weight of the moment than if somebody is called to the stand. But anyway, that's a little bit of a distinction. The witnesses are still under oath, so they are either sworn, you can swear in a Bible, or Book of Worship, Eagle Feather, or affirmed to tell the truth, as you would in a regular court. And so all the witnesses so far have done that, one or the other. All right, so today, like I said, they were dealing with police paraphernalia. There was two presentations by Amanda Bird, who's a Mass Casualty Commission lawyer. We haven't met yet until today. She gave two brief presentations, about half an hour long each, outlining, first of all, the laws surrounding police paraphernalia, what people are allowed to have. I've gone over that before in a previous post, but basically you're not allowed to impersonate a police officer. Went through some of the online searches by Gabriel Wortman in the past, looking, Googling different items. It really seemed, I know there's somewhat of a story, and he has some RCMP in his family. There was a story or a suggestion that this had been a long time obsession of his, the RCMP, but it looks from his searches and his purchasing activity that it really only started in 2018 and really in earnest in 2019. So I'm not sure if this sort of lifetime obsession theory holds water just based on that. The vehicle purchases were all in relative short order, starting in March of 2019 through till September of 2019. So it was just over the course of a few months where he made these purchases. One of the things I was watching for a few things. One has been the silent patrolman, and because we've seen the photos of the replica RCMP vehicle in Shubenacadie after it's burnt out, but the photos have always been blocked off because there's a concern that you would see some unsettling images of Joey Weber's death. But I've been looking for a good clear photo of the silent patrolman, and we saw one today during the final presentation. There was some photos of the replica vehicles taken from well before the shootings, and one shows the silent patrol, which is the barrier between the front and the back seat of an RCMP vehicle. There is, if the middle window is open, certainly enough room to squeeze through, as Lisa Banfield has suggested that she did in order to escape from the killer right away at the beginning of the mass shooting. But it is a legitimate silent patrolman and not some sort of... What I was questioning is whether it was a real one or just sort of a knockoff version, but it appears to be the legitimate article. It was purchased on eBay by Wortman in 2019 as well. The other things that I found of interest today, there was a photo of handcuffs which were located in Shubenacadie. Unclear if they were used by Wortman or not. I know was one of the other things Ms. Banfield says that she was handcuffed but then escaped from handcuffs early in the incident as well. At the same time she squeezed through the silent patrolman. Maybe would explain why they're found still in the replica vehicle if she was able to get out of the handcuffs right away and leave them there. But there's some allusion in other foundational documents to toy handcuffs, but these were not. Those were real ones. The third thing was the radio, and we saw a photo from the replica from prior to, which shows the radio. It was a Motorola. There's records of his purchase of this Motorola radio, and the Mass Casualty Commission says that Wortman could not have heard encrypted communications during his killing spree. Of course, we now know that there were hours, certainly throughout the night, when there was lots of unencrypted communications taking place. So doesn't seem to be a clear answer provided yet as to whether Wortman would have been able to access unencrypted communications. It seems likely that he was, certainly based on his ability to elude the police over that period of time. So that was an interesting thing. The other part of the presentation was talking about how uniforms and police clothing is ordered. And there seems to be a lot of control on the front end and very little on the back end. So what I mean by that is you have to order, you have to get permission to order new stuff. You can't just order a new police uniform every year. That'll arouse suspicion. So there's some monitoring on the front end. There's also monitoring on the specs for certain things so that they don't just publish the specs for all of their gear online, because that would make it much easier to replicate. But on the other hand, so all of this control at the front end, and it's a national sort of ordering program for the clothing. On the other hand, when it's worn out, it's up to the individual detachments to dispose of it. So certainly seems to be a weak point in the sort of flow of official uniforms, which obviously can be very dangerous in the wrong hands. So I'd be curious to see if there's recommendations on changing that procedure, so there's more more oversight at the back end when those are disposed of. So that was part of the presentation today as well. Lots of talk about the surplus vehicles and how those are managed. Their government strips off all of the decals and all that makes them available for resale. A lot of questions about whether that should be even possible, even with the taking the logos off. So I'm sure that will be subject to further discussion. The witness, Max Liberadore, who works at GC Surplus, he was an interesting witness. I think he was really there to talk about what Wortman did when he came to purchase these things. But it turned out that the witness had more interactions with Wortman than he really wanted to admit. There was in his testimony, there was a 30-minute telephone call on a Sunday in his records to Lisa Banfield's cell phone. He was probably speaking with Wortman, but he didn't remember anything about this phone call, a half-hour phone call on a Sunday. That seemed unusual, with a call from a customer. He had gotten, in his original statement to the Mass Casualty Commission, he said he didn't know the killer outside of his work, but it turns out he got a tooth made by him in his denturist business. And then not only that, but had then recommended to his own father to go see Wortman and get some work done. And Wortman didn't charge him for that other work to his dad. But then also said, he was asked, well, have you spoken to your dad about that? And he says, no. Well, anyway, people answer these kinds of questions like this all the time. Like, they're always asked, well, did you speak to somebody about this situation? And in their mind, I know witnesses are thinking, I better say no because it'll just look suspicious if I say yes. And so they say no because they don't want to get into whatever discussions they had or something. But, when it's obvious that you have talked to the person, or in a situation like this, your dad got dentures done by this mass killer, and you're telling us you never spoke to him about it, it just seems unusual, and it seems unlikely that they didn't speak about it. So we'll see if anything else emerges from that. I know he was asked some questions by Ms. Miller after in cross-examination style questions, and not much more of significance emerged from it. It may simply be, like many others, that he doesn't want to admit to having any association whatsoever with Wortman, and maybe that's the extent of it. I think it probably is, but just the fact that he wasn't as forthcoming as he could have been is worthy of note, at least. So that was it for today. There was, like I say, the police paraphernalia, the vehicles, the equipment, all that was discussed. Max Liberadore from GC Surplus spoke, but it was so that was done, more or less by lunchtime, and then a little bit of cross-examination afterwards. The proceedings are back on tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock for submissions from the parties on any items, points that they think were not canvassed thoroughly in the foundational documents. Which I'm sure there will be. I'm sure that there will be some items raised, and then I think it's back Wednesday at 9:30 as well. So I'll be watching that tomorrow, and we'll report at the time and afterwards on anything of significance. And so I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please like and subscribe, share it with a friend, all those good things, and we will see you next time.